Good morning, everyone. It's truly a pleasure to be among God's saints to share a message of health. You know, we live in a time when the Bible tells us that perilous time will come, and we can truly say that perilous time has come. And thank God for the privilege that we have, that we can know who God is, and He can give us the tools that we need so that as we face the trials and tribulation with increased stress and increased problems all around us, that we can know and be forewarned that as He told us that we should get ready, and thank God for the opportunity, for the message and the wisdom that He has given us. I know last week Pastor Elvis spoke about the why of health, and today I'm given the privilege to talk about the how of health. And you know, health is an important aspect because it affects every single one of us. Regardless of how healthy you feel, in some way there might be some friend, some family member who might be going through some challenge. So in some way, you know, there's a song that says, death is sure and life is uncertain. You know, we love to share the good news that we know that, as the song says, this world is not our home, we're just passing through. So for all of us, regardless of how you feel now, we know that one day it will come to us. But we thank God that there is a promise that despite the challenge and despite the grief and the sorrow that we sometimes bear, we have a blessed hope that one day we shall spend eternity with Jesus. Let's just bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, it is so wonderful to be in your house, to fellowship with your people. And Father, we know that as the time draws near, we pray that you would give us the strength, the wisdom, and whatever it takes that we will withstand the fiery darts of the wicked. We know Satan knows his time is short, so he is coming with relentless force against us. But thank God that we can put our trust in you. So bless your words to our hearts this morning in Jesus' name. I remember several years ago, it was about 5 years ago, there was an article that came out, and the article read, the topic was, are you ready to be 100 years old? And it was an interesting article. I'm going to read it just so that I don't miss the concept of what it's trying to say. It says that increasingly, 100-year-olds are making the news. 2 years ago, Emma Hendrickson became the oldest person ever to compete in the U.S. Bowling Congress Women's Championship in Reno, Nevada. Harriet Ames, at 100 years of age, earned her bachelor's degree in January of 2010, although unfortunately she passed away the next day. It was recently revealed that there were centurions taking part in the Adventist Health Study, we know. We can be assured that there will be more stories about centurions in the next few years, especially since those reaching the 100-year mark are the fastest growing sector in our society. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the current 100,000 in this age group is expected to reach well over 500,000 in less than 30 years. So many of us could be part of that group. Patterning one's lifestyle after those who reach the 100th birthday can be filled with twists and turns. Every aspect of their lives comprises a variety of contrasts. 85%. This is the thing that always disturbed me. Disturbed me in a way as men. Because 85% of those who live to be 100 years old are women. And I see Joanne shaking her head there. Yet the 15% of male gender are healthier and more independent. But I was shocked when I read this. Some eat bacon and eggs for breakfast every morning, while others are strict vegetarians or vegans. The level of education varies along with ethnicity. Many come from rich families, while others from low income, and still others from poverty. As we face the challenge of living healthy, and it shouldn't be a challenge, it should be something that we should desire. You know, in my practice, I remember about 6 months ago, there was a lady that came. I was seeing her for the very first time. She was 88 years old and looks well. She was in great health, in her right mind, lived independently. So she asked me a question. She said, actually her daughter was with her. So she was smoking cigarette from the age of 16. She was 88 years old. And we know the menace of tobacco. It's the one thing, actually, whenever we have our board exam, it's the one question they always ask. If you have to advise a patient, and they will give you different scenarios, and one of it would be tobacco, that's always the right answer to stop smoking tobacco, because it really shortens your life, not only as it relates to cancer, but also a lot of the cardiovascular diseases, which are the #1 killers in the world, around the world. So she was 88 years and has been smoking since 16 years. What do I tell her? Do I tell her give it up? Because the reason why you stop smoking is so that you live long. She is independent. She has no medical problem. I won't tell you the answer that I gave her. But when we look at health, there are several aspects of health that affects every one of us. There are two factors, and when you go to your doctor, there are two factors that you really need to know that impact your health. And the two significant factors is if you have a parent or a grandparent, you just need one of the four who have lived to be in their 90s. You just need one. If you have only one, there's a very strong correlation with you living to be 100. It actually is one of the strongest factors. I'm seeing some high fives. So it tells us that genetics plays a role. So genetics plays a significant role. Actually, my dad turned 92 years ago, and we went to Trinidad to celebrate, and I was the featured speaker. And I told him if it's one thing I could say to my dad, he was sitting in front, I said, just thank you for giving me the ability to live to be 100 years old, because it's one of the strongest factors. But genetics always have to circumvent that and share with them that genetics is like a loaded gun. Lifestyle pulls the trigger. The other factor that almost guarantee you the privilege of getting into that group, and there are numbers that you need to know when you go to your doctor and he gives you blood work to tell you about your cholesterol. Don't ever, I hate it when a patient, especially when they're new and they come to me and they're saying, the doctor says everything is okay. That's not the answer that you want. You know, what was your last cholesterol? He just told me that everything was okay. That's not good. There are certain numbers that we have the privilege that God has blessed us, that we have the opportunity that we could get blood tests and we could have all the different aspects of our health given to us. So it's not like when you go to the doctor, it's not free, you're paying for it. So let him explain to you. And it's not rocket science, it's really not rocket science. So when you ask about cholesterol, we know that there's two types of cholesterol. There's good cholesterol and there's bad cholesterol. So even if everything is low, it does not make it well. It doesn't give you guarantee of success in your health. So the other factor besides genetics is anyone who has an HDL, which is the good cholesterol. If your HDL is above 60, population study shows that those are the people who usually live between 80 and 100 years old. There's another blessing to that. When your HDL is above 60, you tend not to have dementia. Because, some people say, but doctor, why would I want to live to be 80 or 90 or 100 years old? If you can get there and be in your right mind, that's a blessing. Because there comes a time when the quantity of your life is not so much important as the quality of your life. Because it makes no sense I get to 80 and 90 and 100 and I can't see, I can't hear, I'm confined to a wheelchair, I'm in pain every day. So that's why whenever my patients get to 50 years old, I always say your first 50 may have been just cavalier. God has blessed you that you've gotten there, but your next 50 years of life should be an investment. So I hope that we invest in our health, because God has blessed us. As a church, we love to say that we are proud of the health message, but you have to really put it in perspective. I'm not here today to talk about meat, whether you're vegan or vegetarian, but just to give you some concept of health that you could adopt to really live a healthy life. Health messages in our church has been one of the foundation of our message. And today we live in a world where there's a lot of information out there. This is the age of information. So if you feel any pain or have any symptoms, you can Google it, because there's also a Dr. Google that you could go to. Whether you understand what Dr. Google's saying, because a lot of the stuff is so not right, but just this is the age of information. And what we find that even when you have the knowledge, the key thing is whether you're really applying the knowledge and the information that you have. And that's why we continue to have so many different illnesses and even people who know better. Because for us, we know, I'm sure that every single Seventh-day Adventist could tell you what New Start is. We know New Start, we have it down pat. But are you practicing what New Start suggests? Because we have become a people who we are very busy, and there's always an excuse not to do something. So that's why for my patients, what I try to, with each visit, try to emphasize, even with the knowledge that you have, are you really applying it to your situation? Are you really trying to secure the best health that you can? And just to refresh you what New Start is, N is for nutrition. We all know that we should eat healthy, and a plant-based diet is always advantageous. And E is for exercise. It's the one thing that we always tell folks that as they I would say that exercise is, in terms of health, is one of the best process to build your health than anything else, because it benefits your cholesterol, it benefits your diabetes, your blood pressure. So exercise is really important. But how many of us are really taking that information about exercise and really gung-ho and doing the things that are beneficial with exercise? Some of these things I'll come back to because I know how important they are. So W is for water. We should be drinking a lot of water, instead of all the sodas. And S is for sunlight. Now, a lot of us, we have been so successful so that wherever we go, anywhere, we get into a car, and when we get to a car, we always look for the park that is closest to the door, wherever we are going. A lot of us, because we work, so we're in a building every day. When you're in that building every day, you come out, you're tired, you get back in your car, you get home, you're in a house, we're not getting enough sunlight. Sunlight is very, very important. And like I said, a lot of us know about New Start, so I'm not going to be spending a lot of time on it because in the interest of time. And T is for for temperance, and many of us, if anyone know what temperance is, the Seventh-day Adventists. Temperance, which is you stay away from the things that are bad and you use moderately the things that are good. A is for air, and again, we live so busy life. A lot of us don't have the fresh air that we really should get. R is for rest, and that always hits me straight in my chest because if you know that I work like crazy, but rest is also very important. And T, the T in New Start is your trust in God. So I'm not spending the time because a lot of you know about these things. What I'd like to share with you is some common diseases that affects us. As a physician, I get to see daily and even weekly and monthly and yearly the devastation of these diseases and the how that we go about it to attain health. I like to share it. But, each time I do a health presentation, I always wish that when I'm finished that we are not the same as we came here. I wish that we would take it, even if it's not for you, but for some family member, so that you could benefit from the knowledge that we have in health. Now, when we look at the challenges that we all face, apart from the pandemic that's going on right now, which is really a disaster. So many people lost their lives, and now it's hitting the highest part of our government. We need to know that we need to take it seriously. But when we look at, I always like to compare cancer versus the many chronic diseases like diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, which a lot of us, even some of us sitting here at this very moment, are struggling with. When a patient comes and we diagnose them with cancer, even if sometimes we don't even have the diagnosis yet, even if we suspect that it is cancer, the next question is, doctor, how long do I live? We haven't even made the diagnosis, but there's a sense of urgency. Doctor, how much time do I have? We don't know. It all depends. So we screen for cancer, and if you pick it up early, breast cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer in male, if you pick it up early, it's 100% curable. So that's why we screen. Every year, approximately 500,000 people die from all the cancers combined. 500,000, that's a lot of people. Let me say, right now, we screaming about 200,000 people that die, but 500,000 people die every year from all the cancers combined. Heart disease, every year, more than 1 million people die from heart disease. But yet still, there is never a sense of urgency when the patient comes and the blood pressure is high, or the cholesterol is high, or your good cholesterol, which is the HDL, is low, because that's a risk factor. Anytime you see a young person or a person in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, or 60s, the majority of time these people die from heart attacks is because their HDL is low. So when you go to the doctor and say everything is okay, it's not okay if your HDL is low. So the total might be low, but it's not okay. So you need to know that. But I just want to get to you the sense of urgency, especially people of color, as it relates to high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol. You need to take it seriously. It's not a joke. Last week, there was a patient. She came to my office, and she was telling me that her sister, who is 44 years old, on Monday, the sister was not feeling well. So she said she thinks she needs to go get a checkup. So her sister, who is my patient, came and said, so she went on Tuesday morning to take her to the doctor, made the appointment. When she went in the door, the sister was dead, 44 years old. None of us could predict. That's the thing about cardiovascular disease. None of us, regardless of who we are, could predict when a person would have an event. 8 months ago, in the Broad Street Run in Philadelphia, 24-year-old teacher got up the morning, went and registered, run the Broad Street Marathon. When he got to the 8-mile mark, he dropped dead. 6 years ago, Philadelphia Marathon, there were 2 runners. One was a 21-year-old Drexel University student. When he ran the marathon, he actually crossed the finish line, he collapsed and he died. Half mile out, there was a 40-year-old that dropped dead. So again, none of us, regardless of who we are, could predict. A few months ago, one of my colleagues, 52 years old, he and his wife went to have dinner, and after they had dinner, they came home and watched a movie, went to bed. In the middle of the night, he put his arm around his wife, 52 years old. She was cold as ice. You cannot predict. One of my patients, this is about a year and a half now, from Coatesville, Pennsylvania. He and his wife, they went to bed. The wife got up in the morning to make breakfast, and while she was making breakfast, he has to leave work at 6:45. And so she's making the breakfast, and she noticed the time is coming, and she's not hearing him. So she went into the room and she's screaming, "What's wrong with you? You tired?" When she shook him, he did not move. He was dead, 37 years old. So none of us could predict that. The only thing that we could do is decrease our risk factors, and there are several risk factors. If you're diabetic, you are treated as though you already have coronary artery disease. So a lot of the parameters that we use for blood pressure and cholesterol, they're lower, and they can be achieved. And I'm not here to push medicine, all right? I'm not here to say, but because of some of you saying, oh, especially the males saying, oh, if I take that medicine, it affects my libido and all these different things. But the process of the disease itself causes it. So it's important to know, if you're diabetic, there's certain things that you know, that you need to know. Because when we talk about cardiovascular disease, it involves diabetes, high blood pressure, and cholesterol. So if you're diabetic, what we need you to know, and again, this should not just be another message. If you're diabetic, there's certain things that you need to know. When a person is diagnosed with diabetes, when you fast, your fasting blood sugar should be less than 100. If it's between 100 and 125, it's considered impaired fasting glucose. We really don't like to say diabetes or borderline diabetes, because when you have a diagnosis of diabetes, your insurance goes up exponentially, again, because you're treated as though you have like you have coronary artery disease. So anything above 126 is considered diabetes. But there's a caveat to it, because the longer you fast, when we give you a blood test, we expect you to fast anywhere between 8 to 12 hours. But the longer you fast, the lower your blood sugar would go. So it's not a test that's very accurate sometimes. Because if I have patients and they're drivers and they have to get the DOT physical and all these different things, the longer you fast, the lower your blood sugar going to go. So it can be deceptive. But there's a test that we use. It's called a hemoglobin A1C. And if you're diabetic and you don't know that, you have to go back and ask the doctor for your money, because that's really, it's malpractice. So every diabetic should know what their hemoglobin A1C is. And the hemoglobin A1C, what it does, it tells us how well your blood sugar is controlled over the past 3 months. And normal value in a person without diabetes is 4.5 to 5.6. Between 5.7 and 6.4, it's considered pre-diabetes or borderline diabetes. Anything above 6.4 is diabetes. So if you're diabetic, the goal is to really try to keep that hemoglobin A1C less than 7. There was a study that was done in Boston. It's called the DCCT trial. In that trial, it was over 25,000 patients, so it makes the study very, very authentic. What they found that if you are diabetic and we can keep your hemoglobin A1C less than 7, we could almost guarantee you that you would not go blind, you would not get kidney failure, would not get amputation. Those are the three complications of diabetes that we really try to avoid. If you go to any diabetic center, the majority of people there, or any dialysis center, the majority are diabetic. So we want to prevent that. Again, if you're going to live to be 100, we want your quality of life to be one that it's, you work hard all your years, you should have some way to enjoy it and not having to go sit in a dialysis center every day. So again, try to keep that hemoglobin A1C less than 7. When it's above 7, everything is out the door. We cannot predict the complication. Also, it's one of the leading causes for strokes and for heart attacks. So quickly, I mentioned before about cholesterol. It's one of the things that even though you're not diabetic, it affects a lot of us. And so when we look at cholesterol, we know that the total cholesterol should be less than 200. But there's two types of cholesterol. There's good cholesterol, there's bad cholesterol. Why would cholesterol just seem as though it's a bad thing? So why do we say there's good and bad? The good cholesterol is the HDL, and it stands for high density lipoprotein. And when you have a good cholesterol, the reason why we call it good, it literally goes inside the blood vessel and it acts like a Roto-Rooter. It cleans the blood vessel out. So that's why you want it to be as high as possible. The higher the better. In males, it should be more than 40. In females, it should be more than 50. The reason the difference is, before menopause, more men die from heart disease than female. When women get to menopause, they catch up. And overall, more women overall die from heart disease. And one of the things with women can have what we call the atypical symptoms, in the sense that typically if a person is having a heart attack, they have chest pain radiating to the neck, down the arms. That's a classic symptoms. But a lot of people don't have any symptoms. My mom was a classic example. She was never sick. I was in medical school, and she, when I went to medical school at Penn State, she came, she spent some time with me, and then she went back home to Trinidad. And we would speak to her very often. One night I spoke to her for about an hour. We chat, we laugh, we smile. Then Ingrid spoke with her, then my son Richard spoke with her. We went to bed. And when you get that early morning call from across the room, as Ingrid answered the phone, I'm hearing the cries in the telephone. And she got up, she and my dad, they prayed and had worship. He went off to work, she went back to bed and didn't wake up. Didn't even have chest pain. So a lot of times you don't have symptoms. Some people could just feel fatigue, no energy. And a lot of people, only when we do autopsy that we find that they have a heart attack. And that was my mom. She was only 57 years old. So we cannot predict. All right, so the HDL, you want the HDL to be as high as possible. So anyone that gets the HDL above 60, as I mentioned, population studies suggest they live between 80 and 100 and they don't get dementia. The next question, how do I get my HDL up? Some people genetically have high HDL. Exercise builds it. There's no food you can eat to build your HDL. It's either built by exercise, or exercise builds it and tobacco suppresses it. And that's one of the reasons why we don't smoke, even though that lady lived for 88 years and she was still smoking. And I know many of you are going to ask me what I told her. So it just shows you the benefit of exercise. And then the other thing is your LDL, which is your bad cholesterol. So let your doctor tell you your number. Don't just say it's okay. So the bad cholesterol, which is the LDL, and the reason why we call it bad cholesterol, when you eat, regardless of what you eat, if you don't burn it up, the rest you store as fat and as cholesterol in the lining of the blood the vessel. And that's the bad cholesterol. And remember, when I talk about a person who have had a heart attack in their 20s and 30s, because cardiovascular disease should be a disease of aging. When we get to like 70s, 80s, that's when you should have it. But more and more, the Bible tells us that men's hearts are failing them for fear. And that's why we're seeing more and more younger people now are having heart disease, because we eat a lot of foods that high in calories, low in nutrients. And that's why when you talk about nutrition, let's try to eat healthy. Let's try to eat lots of fruits, lots of vegetables. That should be part of how we eat, okay? So when you eat and you didn't burn it up, it stores it as fat and as cholesterol. That's the bad cholesterol. If a person has no risk factor whatsoever, we like that LDL to be less than 130. If a person have diabetes, your LDL should be absolutely less than 100. If you have had a history of heart attacks or stroke, then the goal for that LDL is to be less than 70. We have recently even actually put into that list males who have had erectile dysfunction. We are also saying, because that could be a classic sign that you have other blockages or plaques in other parts of your artery. So we're again suggesting the lower it is, the better it is. So that's for your cholesterol. And again, exercise builds it. And I don't know how much time I have still, because I'm sure the time is running away. But the next thing I want to talk about is high blood pressure. High blood pressure, actually there was an article that came out this week in the New England Journal of Medicine in terms of how poorly we are managing high blood pressure, especially in African American males. Now, a lot of these diseases, when you hear them say, oh, it's higher in the black population, it's not because of genetics why we have it. A lot of it has to do with lifestyle. Certainly, we know economics play a role in a lot of stuff. If we don't have money to buy stuff, then we buy the cheapest stuff. We determine how we eat, and we just don't take care of ourselves. Now, when we think about high blood pressure, there's a lot of changes over the past 3 years in terms of the numbers that we use. Previously, we would say that if your blood pressure is less than 140 over 90, we used to think that you're okay. Just to back up a little bit, what the blood pressure is, the blood pressure that's in your body that we check, the top number is called the systolic blood pressure. That's when the heart squeezes. The bottom number is the diastolic. That's when the heart relaxes. So it is the pressure that the heart has to generate to get blood flowing. The blood is loaded with oxygen and nutrition throughout your body. So the heart is a pump. The pump is made up of muscle. If you take a can of peas or something and every day you take that can of peas and pump your arm, the muscle's gonna get bigger and bigger. If the heart has to every day push against a high pressure, the heart gonna get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Then it gets weaker and weaker. It can't push the fluid forward. It backs up into the lungs. That's what we call congestive heart failure. A lot of times I have patients who, they come to me and they say they have congestive heart failure. They think the congestion is in the heart. The congestion is in the lungs because the heart muscle is weak. When you start seeing swelling in your legs, it could be a sign of that. So it is really absolutely important to get your blood pressure under control. The new numbers that we have now, there was a study that was done in Florida. It's called the SPRINT trial. And in that study, what they concluded was that really the ideal blood pressure should be a systolic, remember the top number, should be between 110 and 120. That's really the number you should be shooting for. Between 120 and 130, we call it elevated blood pressure. When you get to 130, which you think it was okay, between 130 and 140, we now call that stage 1 hypertension. So it is important. High blood pressure is the leading cause of stroke, the number one cause of strokes. All right? Not only that, dementia. People think when you have dementia, the first thing they think about Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is just a type of dementia. The number one cause for dementia is high blood pressure, because it causes these very small, minute strokes. So it's not a stroke where you feel paralyzed. But if the blood vessel that feeds the cognitive part of the brain, if those blood vessels get plaques, it's cut off the supply of blood to the cognitive part of the brain. So it is absolutely the number one cause of dementia. We call that vascular dementia. And these things can be prevented. They're diseases of lifestyle. So if you do lifestyle changes, because in terms of blood pressure, I could guarantee you, if you exercise regularly, you can bring your blood pressure down by 10 points, which is the equivalent of one medication. And why are we not doing it? We are busy. When we get home, we're tired. And some of the excuses, they're almost like valid. But when you balance what's really important, that's why, when I turned 50 years of age, I was coming back from a plane. I went to visit my dad, and I was in the airplane, and I'm thinking to myself, really, the reality hits me. When I turn 50, it means that I've lived more than half of my life, because not a lot of people get to be 100. So that was a reality. So I always tell my patient, this next 50 years of your life should be an investment. And it really doesn't take much. You don't have to be wealthy. You really don't have to be wealthy to live healthy. I could adopt that phrase. I never thought about it. Yeah. But I just wish that we would really pay cognizance to our health. And, God has blessed us a lot of time to work hard to get what we have and to, be where we are in life. And you want to get to the point when you're retired to still be able to enjoy the whatever is left. We know this world is not our home, but again, living in pain and just your quality of life is one that's in the toilet. It's no way to live. And so I wish that these little, information, that you take it, and even if you don't need it, because you might say, Dr. Agard, you preach into the choir, because I am as healthy as possible, but share it with your children, share it with your grandchildren, share it with your family. And like I said, it's not rocket science. And if you could just try to find a way to commit yourself to exercise. Actually, there was a study, and this study was done on women, that if you exercise half an hour a day, 3 times a week, you're going to add 2.5 years to your life. If you take that up to 5 times a week, you're going to add 4.9 years, almost 5 years to your life. And that's just walking. Actually, it was walking. So you don't have to go run a marathon. It was just simple walking. So some patient would say, but Dr. Agard, I do construction and I walk on my... We don't count that. There's some benefit. You could walk from here to Wilmington every day. Yes, there's but you have to do a purposeful walk in which you increase your heart rate, because when you do that, your resting heart rate goes down. And we normally say the heart rate, normal heart rate is between 60 to 100. The human heart beats about 3 billion times in its lifetime. You want your heart rate to be down in the 60s. Some people, when you're an athlete, could even be in the 50s. And when your heart rate is down there, it's going to take its time to get to that 3 billion. If it's up in the 90s, although it's normal, but you're going to get there quickly. All right? So try, and exercise helps to lower your heart rate. It must be something purposeful, something that speeds your heart rate up so that your resting heart rate goes down. And I don't know, somebody would indicate to me how much more time I have, but in terms of screening for cancer, which even though I mentioned that cardiovascular disease is the thing that kills us most, but God bless us that we're in a position that a lot of us could have screened. Women, you need to have your screening for breast cancer. Because again, if we pick it up early, it's 100% curable. And the people who are at risk for it, if you have a family history of breast cancer, if people who have had their menstrual cycle at an early age, and those who had menopause at a late age, because the longer you're exposed to estrogen, that's what puts you at risk. Obesity is another risk factor for breast cancer. So these are the things that you need to know. And a simple mammogram, yes, it might be very tender when they press on the breast. There are new techniques that they have, but at least have it. My sister, who lives in Philadelphia, we did a program at her church, a health program, and she's my sister. She didn't have insurance, so things she would call, and I would take care of it. She's normally healthy. There's no one in our family that we know who have breast cancer. And so we did a program in our church, and one of the doctors who worked with me said, just come down and we do a full physical. So we did that, and after we did that, she asked, so when last you had a mammogram? She said, oh, I'd never had one because I didn't have insurance. So I arranged for one of the radiologists to do a mammogram. So when he called me, he said, there was something that he saw that he didn't like. And a lot of times these mammograms, we can see calcification. A lot of them, they can be artifacts. So in my mind, I'm telling myself, no, that's my sister. We don't have any cancer in the family. No, she doesn't have it. But I said, okay, let's get a biopsy. So we did the biopsy at Christiana. And the doctors there, everybody know me. Dr. Agard, your sister, the biopsy kind of shows something. And I'm still thinking, okay, that's an artifact. It's not real, but it was real. Thank God it was early. She was able to have a mastectomy and some chemotherapy and a lot of you who are against medicine, these things saves lives. And, sometimes I say, God has blessed us with wisdom. And we are not saying that we have all the answers, but we're in a country where we could have things done, we could follow the science. And sometimes I tell my patients, especially when we come with all kind of excuse not to do stuff, and which some of them have no scientific basis. I said, the beautiful thing about America is the only place in the world that you have the right to be stupid. Let's take the evidence that God has blessed us with, the science, and use it to our advantage. I always tell my patients, and they always know me as a Christian, I pray a lot for my patients. God has blessed us, and I always tell them that still all healing comes from Him. Regardless of what institution your doctor might go to, still remember all healing comes from God. So colon cancer, again, at age 50, we normally recommend screening. If you have a family member, it should be 10 years earlier. If you have, that means if you have a family member that had colon cancer at 45, you have to have colonoscopy at 35. If they had it at 35, the immediate family have to have it at 25. Recently, they have dropped the age, especially for African American, whereby colonoscopy is now recommended at age 45. And if you don't want to do the colonoscopy for whatever reason, there's a Cologuard you see advertised on television where they use the genetics of your stool, in which you can, as they use the genetics, it's 92% accurate, but yet still it gives you the privilege of knowing. And again, there are two types of polyps. One is a hypoplastic polyp, the other one is an adenoma polyp, again, which is precancerous. So again, get the information, get the knowledge, and most of all, my text today, going back to John chapter 10 and verse 10, that says, the thief came to steal and to destroy, but let us remember that God, who created us, He came to give life and to give it more abundantly. Thank you again. God bless you. Hopefully at some point in time when we have more time to share information, I'll be happy to come back, because you guys are like family to me.